You know, this channel could probably use a makeover. Let's see, is there any sort of spell I can use for that? Aha! Here it is. Mage Maverick. Huh. Can't say I was expecting that to happen. I will say I'm digging the new look, though. Ooh, it comes with a new intro. What do you say we roll that? With all my talk about how much I love boss battles and hate when developers royally screw them up, you'd think I would have tackled this topic much sooner than now. Oh well, better late than never. Final bosses are arguably the most important boss in a game. They're usually the last piece of gameplay that a game has to offer, so you'll want to end your game off on a high note. Yet for some reason, some just don't seem to get that memo because, wow, we've had a lot of underwhelming finales in gaming. Whether they're wasted potential, feel lazily put together, or make you question if the developers just wanted to get to their lunch break quicker, there's a lot that can come into play on why a final boss can fall flat. Something I'm going to be looking into today. Also, before I begin, since we're dealing with final bosses, I'm just going to give the obligatory spoiler warning now, though I'll probably give another one on specific segments if I go into further detail. But now that the formalities have been covered, let's get this show on the road. Now, admittedly, this first pick is more so a situation of the boss being super disappointing rather than an absolutely awful battle, hence why I'm saving it for the bottom of this list, but I still feel like this absolutely deserves a mention, especially compared to what the game had to offer before. So with that said, how about that Rayman Legends final boss, am I right? I mean, talk about taking so many steps back right at the end. I went up against mechanical dragons and titan-sized luchadors earlier, and now you're gonna end this ridiculous game with something as simplistic as a dark cloud demon, and the simplicity carries over into the boss fight too. While the platforming parts in between each phase can be kind of fun, the actual fight portions just amount to you shooting at him while he just floats around the arena. You'd think that a team as creative as the ones behind Rayman Legends would be able to come up with something better for a final battle, especially considering that the final world is based on Greek mythology, the birthing ground for so many monsters that would perfectly fit for a game's final fight. But nope, Dark Cloud Demon. At least you get access to the best level in the game after this. Oh boy, going from one of my favorite 2D platformers straight to my all-time favorite 2D platformer. Today's gonna be one of those days, isn't it? Look, I may love Donkey Kong Country 2 to bits, but I will be the first to admit the final battle against Captain K. Rool was seriously underwhelming. Now just to clarify, I'm not talking about the fight against him in the Flying Croc, because that's by far the best boss in the entire game. No, I'm talking about the rematch against K. Rool in the Lost World. Let me just put it this way. You've got to find and complete every single bonus level in the entire game to get all the Creme coins that will grant you access to all 5 of the Lost World's levels. Then you gotta actually make it through all those levels, which can I say that whoever designed those levels, particularly Animal Antics, are cruel human beings who do not deserve your trust, and the payoff for all that hard work is a boss fight that lasts just over a minute, has a way more simplistic attack pattern compared to the battle before, and ends after only dealing one hit to him? Good. Now, while yes, you can debate if this would truly count as the game's final boss, since you don't need it to get the game's standard ending, you do need to beat it to get the game's true ending, so I'm counting it. And I gotta say, this final result definitely feels like a letdown, especially compared to the previous fight. Starting to think getting first on Cranky's hero podium really isn't worth it. I love Naughty Dog. Between Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, and Uncharted, these guys have made some absolute favorites for me in gaming. But I gotta say, it astounds me that they're currently the only game developers I've ever seen set a bar for a final boss fight as low as it can get, and somehow still get under that bar with its execution. And sadly, this has actually happened on more than one occasion with them, as we'll get to later. But for now, let's talk about how much Uncharted 1's final boss sucks. It's bad enough that your target for this battle is by far the worst of the 3 villains in Uncharted 1, which is honestly saying a lot, but then you start the battle off with a shootout against his goons, and already I'm considering just throwing Nathan overboard instead. To put it simply, shootouts in Uncharted 1 are the actual worst, due to enemies in this game having overpowered weapons, anti-stormtrooper precision, and an endless amount of them. Add on the fact that most of your cover is easily destroyable, and keep in mind that we haven't even reached Navarro himself yet. But when you do, the fight somehow gets even worse. Navarro follows a very strict attack pattern, with no clear clue of how you're supposed to handle it initially, and if you sway off it even just a little bit, one hit kill. But once you figure out the attack pattern and actually get to him, you're thrown into a few quick time events against him, and voila, you've earned your game-ending achievement. Nearly 10 minutes after Navarro hijacks the plot, and he's already being sent to his grave. What a joke. Fighting game bosses, generally known for being soul-crushingly hard. Whether it's a fair AI that just knows what they're doing with the game's mechanics, or breaking the rules to make your life a living nightmare, most fighting game bosses usually want to make you work for that ending. The point I'm getting at is, easy fighting game bosses are few and far between. On the flip side, you could be Capcom and provide one of the most underwhelming fighting game bosses in history in the form of M. Bison in Street Fighter V's story mode. What do you say we start off with how Capcom screwed up this finale on a storytelling point right out the gate? Having Nash be the one who brings Bison down makes sense from the way you've been taking the story. But to have his sacrifice do nothing to Bison, making his resurrection in hindsight absolutely pointless, and now having Ryu step in to end it all off feels forced, as obvious as it is since you know Ryu is the main character of the series. But whatever. Ryu vs. M. Bison is how they're going to end it off. Fine. How are they going to spice it up? It is a final boss after all, you gotta do something with it. Okay, one round battle works too. Huh. You build this up as the big final showdown with Bison and you're gonna do nothing with it? It's even easier than when you were using Nash. Saddest thing is, the potential for a final boss was literally right on the plate, even more obvious than you may think. In Street Fighter V, every character gets their own prologue chapter for the story mode, and each one contains a special costume for them based on what happens in their chapter. And although Bison doesn't have an alternate costume at all during his chapter, he still got a special story mode costume, and it looked like this. So my question is, why the crap didn't you use this? Doing something as simple as swapping out his costume to show how powerful he's become at this point would give this fight at least a little bit more to it. Or, alternatively, make it a 2-round fight, and after you win the first round, Bison ups his power, breaks out the alternate costume, and has his AI buffed. It's really that simple. But nah, we'll just stick with a 1-round fight that even fighting game scrubs like me could be with ease. Capcom, you never cease to disappoint. You know, there's a lot of things I would do if I gained the ability to time travel. I'd meet my childhood icons before they died, I'd see legendary moments in history play out before my very eyes, just to name a few. But a very big one on my time travel bucket list would be to go to Nintendo's headquarters during the development of Super Mario Sunshine and find out who thought the Bowser fight was a good idea. Like, seriously, Nintendo? I get that Sunshine had this whole vacation vibe throughout, but you're really gonna have your final battle take place on an evil flying hot tub? And the problems don't stop with just concept alone, oh no. It's bad enough that this is following up one of the least functional parts of a pretty easy to break game, but now you've got a boss fight with blatantly obvious weak points, attacks that can be avoided simply by turning around, and above all else, some of the worst clipping issues I've ever seen in a Nintendo game. Those tiny cracks are surprisingly easy to fall through, and usually you won't have enough time to get the rocket nozzle going to save yourself, so be prepared for some cheap deaths. Say what you will about other Bowser fights like the one in Galaxy 2 or in New Super Mario Bros. 2, but at the very least, they function. This one can't even achieve that, which only adds on to an already weak final battle. So I could use this segment to go on another tangent about Yu Yevon from Final Fantasy X or Necron from Final Fantasy IX, but believe it or not, I'm not going to be talking about either of them for this video. For one, I don't want to sound like a broken record by ranting about them yet again, and secondly, I've been in desperate need to get on the soapbox about a certain Final Fantasy 15. Now don't get me wrong, I liked Final Fantasy 15. It wasn't the masterpiece I was hoping it'd be, but I still enjoyed my playthrough of it. That being said, its story definitely could have used some work, many of its characters felt seriously underused and underdeveloped, and honestly, swapping out directors midway through development was a mistake, because Hajime Tabata played the experimentation card way too much with this game. And nowhere is that more apparent than with the game's concluding boss fight. Talk about dropping the ball right at the end. Everything in the final chapter leading up to this battle was going quite smoothly, but then we get to the final boss and everything starts to collapse in on itself. For starters, the battle is a one-on-one duel of equals, a general staple for hack and slashes and games with hack and slash-like gameplay. And in hindsight, this could very easily work with Final Fantasy XV's gameplay style, except the boss in question, Arden Izunya, is still designed like a boss you're supposed to fight with a full party of 4. He takes too little damage from your hits, and your windows for attack are quite low, so this first phase goes on for way longer than it really should. But the second phase starts and the Power of Light mode is broken out. The Power of Light had only been used once prior to this point in the game, so it's nice to see it again, except it really doesn't work here. See, the first time you used light mode, it was in the battle against Leviathan, which worked quite well. But in this battle, you're going against a much smaller target, so your projectile moves tracking is exceedingly weaker. Also, with your now infinite MP, you can just keep phasing around and not get hit by a single one of Arden's attacks. So generally, it once again just drags out longer than it should while being too easy. This brings us to the final phase, taking the whole weak and staggering hits idea from Metal Gear Solid 4's final battle, except it doesn't really work nearly as well here because unlike in MGS4, there's really no oomph to any of your blows. So it feels more like you're trying to swing your sword at Arden while drunk. It's like Tabata tried to incorporate as many elements of great final bosses from other games into his without really knowing how to properly do it, and it really brings down the whole experience. At least the ending afterwards is fantastic. boy, time to talk about this broken mess. Okay, taking out the fact that Spyro Into the Dragonfly was clearly a rushed game with glitches and frame rate issues up the wazoo, as a game itself, it's really not that great. It takes quite a few steps back from the original PS1 trilogy in almost every aspect, and hey, what do you say we keep that trend going by ending off the game with a Ripto boss fight that's just several layers of no. Starting off the battle, Ripto pulls up a shield of ice spheres, requiring you to melt them all using your fire breath. Granted, this is easier said than done due to the fact that Ripto zips around the arena way too freaking fast, and oh yeah, his ice spheres can be fired as homing shots. These shots have ridiculously good accuracy, and the hit animation you go through when you're hit by them lasts just long enough that he can easily get you into a loop of infinite getting hit by his shots until you're dead. Once the shields are destroyed and Ripto's hit, he does the exact same thing but with fire instead of ice. I mean, you need to use your ice breath instead, but it plays out exactly the same as before, so what exactly is the point of this phase? Oh, but don't worry, he's got a third phase that doesn't incorporate a shield, but instead he casts a spell on himself and hello, horrifying PS2 model! Also, he launches electric energy balls and a full platform energy wave that do the same bullcrap stun lock that the homing shots in the previous phase did, and this boss fight has the possibility of glitching out by having the AI just vanish out of the model and prevent the fight from progressing. Couldn't be Enter the Dragonfly without a game-breaking bug, am I right? This boss is just an amalgamation of a bunch of really poor design choices, combined with the incomplete nature that Enter the Dragonfly was left in when it was released, and it just provides a very irritating experience. Also, shoutouts to this battle having quite possibly the worst final boss theme I've ever heard in my entire life. It starts out pretty okay, but then it becomes a clustered mess by the end, right down to what sounds like Stuart Copeland bashing his head against the piano in frustration for having to compose this. I mean, I can't blame him. Final bosses in the Sonic series. Most of the time they can range from pretty alright to fantastic, but there have been a small handful of bosses in the series that just don't work. I was able to narrow down my pick to one of two choices, and initially it was difficult to figure out which one to go with. The Babylon Guardian from Sonic Riders, or the Egg Robo from Sonic Lost World. And although the Egg Robo was a blatant copy-paste of the Egg Nega Wisp from Colors, at the very least it's a copy-paste of a good boss fight. The same can't be said about Babylon Guardian, who just sucks all around. Rather strangely, the Babylon Guardian boss fight still contains a traditional race against other riders, but the difference is that the laps don't progress, even if you pass the starting line, until you hit the Babylon Guardian in that lap. He's always floating ahead, and you need to use your boost to hit his lamp and do damage. But most of the time, you're bound to be too low on air to use a boost by the time you reach him, and if you don't boost to his lamp right when you get to him, he'll fly way ahead. Each lap he adds a new attack, but it's really of no consequence because of one eensy-weensy but ever so crucial little tiny detail. There's no way to lose! None of his attacks do any sort of damage to you aside from brief stun, there's no time limit, heck I don't even know if coming in first after destroying the Babylon Guardian is mandatory. I mean, for all I know it could be, but by the time you destroy him, you're gonna be far enough ahead already that falling behind seems pretty improbable. Combine this with the fact that the Babylon Guardian is a token that comes out of nowhere and poofs out of existence the second he's beaten, boss, and you've got yourself a pretty lackluster finale to a pretty alright game. It's a good thing Zero Gravity proceeded to take this boss concept and fine-tune it with its final battle. I miss the Sonic Riders games. In hindsight, PlayStation All-Stars could have been a really good Sony equivalent to Smash Bros., but oh, did this game miss its mark. Though I've already gone on a long enough tangent about this game's mediocrity in the past, so I'm not going to do that song and dance again. Instead, let's talk about how stupid the Polygon Man boss fight was. I'll admit that having Sony's scrapped mascot concept revived as this game's final boss was kind of a neat idea, but holy crap was this executed poorly. Problem number one. Having 90% of the boss fight being fighting clones of various characters from the roster while Polygon Man just floats in the background throwing out annoying quips about his superiority. It really feels no different than any other battle you've gone through during the arcade mode. Problem number two. When Polygon Man does get involved, it's either by turning into one of the previous stage's background hazards or slamming himself down in the arena once the clones are destroyed to attack you, leaving him vulnerable to damage, which ties into problem number three. PlayStation All-Stars gameplay style. Because you can only KO enemies with supers in this game, both of Polygon Man's ways of attacking can only take away from your super meter, which in and itself isn't very difficult to regain. So in other words, Polygon Man literally can't kill you, only his clones can. Because of all this fight can go by within such a quick time, and Polygon Man will vanish out of history just as quickly as he did when he was first introduced.
How could this happen? None have beaten me until now.
I find that extremely hard to believe. So with the recent release of the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy, I've definitely felt my inner child feel the most alive in quite some time. With a solid remake of my all-time favorite game, as well as two strong remakes of Crash 1 and 2 that actually made both games better for me, playing through this collection has been a phenomenal experience. However, through doing so, it has also brought something else back to light that I haven't let my mind linger on in over a decade. Cortex Strikes Back's final boss is one of the worst things I've ever experienced in a video game. What the crap happened here, Naughty Dog? Seriously, I want to know who exactly in your studio came up with the idea behind this final battle and give him a thorough talking to or something, I don't know. This is more than just the worst final boss I've ever faced. This is honestly a contender for one of the worst boss fights I've ever come across, period. Literally by concept alone, the final fight against Cortex in Crash 2 is a train wreck in the making. Hey, you know that jetpack mechanic we just introduced a few levels ago that's a bit finicky to use and designed for slower paced levels? Yeah, let's make a high-speed chase sequence with it for our final boss. Did no one at Naughty Dog have the common sense to say, yeah, this may be a really stupid idea, let's not use this? The idea itself is bad enough, but in execution, it somehow gets even worse. Despite the awkward jetpack controls now being forced onto you into a high-speed chase sequence through the asteroid and minefield in an attempt to catch Cortex before it gets away, this battle's actually pathetically easy. All you need to do is spin attack Cortex 3 times and the fight's over. And it's not like there's much in regards to challenge here. Cortex doesn't attack you at all despite having a laser gun in hand, and the asteroids and mines only stun you for a brief second. Literally the only way you can lose at this boss is if Cortex manages to get away. But even that's easier said than done because if he gets far enough ahead, he'll actually stop and wait for you. I'm not even joking when I say that when I first fought this boss at 8 years old, I got a game over on this fight not because it was too hard for me, but because I thought you had to do something like spin attack one of the meteors into Cortex or something. I legit was losing lives because I thought there was more to the boss than there actually was. Instead we have a boss fight that lasts an average of 30 seconds at most. Heck, with the Insane trilogy and its tweaking of the jetpack's controls, I'd argue it's actually even easier than before now. It's like I said earlier, Naughty Dog's the only company I've ever seen set a final boss fight's bar so low and still get under that bar. Now all that I'm trying to figure out is how on earth they managed to do that more than once.